Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another Transport Technology Forum conversation. Another fireside chat, although I haven't quite got the fire lit here. I'm particularly pleased that this afternoon we're going to be discussing something that I've been interested in professionally for at least a decade now. That's been worrying away at me. And it's about how can we get to a world when we really take advantage of the fact that we have connected cars and we can see signs, see messages, see what we need to see as drivers in the vehicle and not be wholly reliant on the world of great big and very expensive tin signs strung up beside the road or variable message signs. So that's what we're going to be focusing on this afternoon. We've got an excellent panel, all of whom have got a lot of experience in this area. I'm going to be very keen to hear from them. And at the end, we're going to put up a little poll because we're interested in what you're interested in, the delegates, the attendees at this event. What would you like future fireside chat events to be? Happily, this is a curated poll, so I won't see it until somebody who's gone through it and struck out all of the less appropriate suggestions, but hopefully we'll get some interesting and sensible ones of things that you would genuinely like us to be getting people together to discuss at future fireside chats. We've got some ideas of our own, but we'd love to hear yours. So that's how we're going to end up. We're going to talk in particular about some of the experience we had in a particular project. We're going to show you a VT in just a moment or two, which I've been particularly interested in. And then we're also going to be having a look at some upcoming events in the world of the Transport Technology Forum. So I hope that's what you were expecting, because that's what's going to happen. And I'm going to go straight in with the video, which is about a project that came about because of a discussion I had with Mr. Andy Graham of this parish, who some of you may know, a rather shadowy figure who moves around this area. And we were discussing what could be done to have a different sort of event, a different sort of bit of research project that wasn't about modern cars, wasn't about cars with great big touch screens, but was about the London-to-Brighton Run. And of course, some of you may know the RAC Foundation was set up by the Royal Automobile Club and the RM Sotheby's London-to-Brighton Veteran Car Run have been running for many, many years now. And if we could connect the cars in the London-to-Brighton Run and genuinely give the occupants of those cars useful, pertinent, timely information, well, wouldn't that just be a proof of concept? And I'm very pleased to say that the chairman of the club, Ben Cousins, a chum of mine, and some of the other senior members of the club were enthusiastic. So let's just see a quick video, which Paul Hutton has made for us, which gives us a taster. And then if people want to see the full video later or click on the report of how we went about this and what we learned, they can do that. There'll be a link available on the website. So I'm going to ask our Ilkley colleagues now, let's run the VT.
1903 Daimler, 1901 Wars and 1900 Daimler were fitted with technology based on smartphones carrying bespoke apps, which both shared their location with organisers and gave the vehicles navigation and in-vehicle route information, such as roadworks, congestion and safety messages, thus becoming the world's oldest connected cars.
We've got two apps on board. They are the world's oldest connected vehicles. We've been tracking them on the way to Hyde Park. And we'll be tracking them all the way down to Brighton. We've also been putting messages into the vehicle, which are virtual signs. So, for example, on the way here, it says, keep left on the way to get into Hyde Park. And we'll also be able to get messages from the vehicles. And what this demonstrates is that you don't have to have a brand new vehicle to be connected. These are 121 years old and are slightly younger. They're not by no means the youngest vehicles here. There's steam over there. You could hear it. And here comes one now. And there's a whole variety of vehicles here that we could think about in the future of being connected vehicles.
The drivers acknowledged the value of the technology.
Well, obviously the route, although it remains largely the same, we've got split routes coming out of London, one over Westminster Bridge, one over Lambeth Bridge. And then it's all about following the route and also the team behind, Andy being able to track us. So seeing whether we can, how we're progressing, have we gone off the route. We've got one phone which is giving us a route map so we can see where it is, and hopefully we'll also tie in with all the route signs and pop-up warnings saying prepare to turn right, prepare to turn left. So that ultimately will allow us, if we can introduce across the whole entry list, it'll make it a much safer run, because people will get forewarning of when a change of direction is occurring or a critical junction. And indeed, if something occurs on the route, an incident or a breakdown, so we can alert other drivers to it.
And there we close on a picture of Duncan, who is the chair of the Royal Automobile Club Motoring Committee, driving on his way down to Brighton, an uninterrupted and trouble-free drive, which I guess in some ways, George and Damien, I wouldn't like to say we were hoping for problems along the way, but in testing out our systems, it was a lovely sunny day. We didn't have horrific problems. We didn't have major traffic holdups, but I think it was still quite an interesting proof of concept. But let's start, George, with you. This was a trial, I guess, like no other, but I mean, some people might have said, so these people had some mobile phones, they had sat nav, so what? What was better about what we did with these guys than just somebody clicking onto Waze and following the instructions from their fellow road users?
Well, I think the difference here and the kind of the whole environment really was to set up a means to project messages into cars directly under control from a center. So basically the technology allowed was capable of someone in a control center just identifying that there was a problem on the network, and within a few seconds, basically within 2 or 3 seconds, that message being in the vehicle at the exact point in space that it was relevant on the thing. Now the background of this is that I've been working with Andy Graham for quite a while on different projects, and I kind of basically put together a little ecosystem to demonstrate in-vehicle VMS, which had everything you really need to do it. It had sort of cloud hosting set up for the data. It had many different apps of different kinds, so you could explore different ways of putting data into cars, and doing IVS, doing Glosser, direct car integration, a point and click GUI, so you can see what's going on. And when I was talking to Andy about the possible the different things, the integrating a Model T came up, and then we started talking about the London-to-Brighton, and it all went on from that. And all of a sudden we had this wonderful little project, which was really quite fun, I think.
Excellent. Well, I think that we all felt that it was a great success, and something, if people do click on the link to see the full video that Paul Hutton has made for us, you'll see that the participants, our 3 volunteers from the Royal Automobile Club, all said that one of the things that they found really helpful, really reassuring, was the sense that they weren't on their own out on the road, even though lots of people were lining the way to say well done and cheer them on their way. But in terms of the route itself, in terms of the risks ahead, the opportunities ahead, there was somebody looking out for them. And if they needed to be in touch with somebody, that could happen. And I think that was a genuinely reassuring thing, and it's something we want to build on, hopefully with the club for next year. We're still in conversation there, but I'm going to ask Damien now. So how do we make it happen? It feels like we just log on to Waze, we're going down to Brighton. What's so complicated about that?
Yeah, I mean, when we're planning on how to produce a new service for the London-Brighton run, we're looking at different things to make it better for the participants. So they're starting in London, they're driving to Brighton, and what's interesting is they generally follow a single route, and a lot of the participants do the route year in, year out. There are some new people coming in who might not be familiar with the route. But if we compare what Eloy built with, I guess, the alternatives of Waze, Google, etc., is This idea of just a fixed route sat nav, it sounds quite simplistic, but what you're having is no rerouting. It's got a one route in, it follows it. And if you go off route, you actually want to tell the drivers, stop, turn around, rejoin the route. And it makes a lot of sense for these drives, because the roads that the participants are meant to go along have been set up and chosen to suit the vehicles, but also you've got spectators and you've got all these other factors coming in. So it makes sense to do it. But what you want is, RAC, from their perspective, would like to go onto a map and plot it, or it's really easy. How do you get that into the app? So we have a web portal, you go and draw your route, we consume that information, and that is then locked into a sat nav. So our app has a normal sat nav mode, but if you're a participant in the event, you click on a special ticket and that launches a special sat nav mode, which not only has this fixed route added in, but it also turns on the in-vehicle signage, and you build an experience around it, which is really nice for participants. If they stop, kind of their location saved, and they can sort of have a break if they're getting refueled, or if they're stopping halfway, and they can continue on, and the route's there for them to carry on. The nice bit also is if you go off route, we're popping up these red alerts that pop up on the screen and do an audio alert saying, stop, please turn around. The sat nav will not send you off on a different route. You sort of divert away from the blue line, and you need to go back and follow your blue line that's the sat nav. So it's quite nice. I think from our perspective, we kind of had to re-engineer how the app works. Sat nav has different components to it, but we have to override to stop the app rerouting and put in bits and pieces. So it's quite a nice software build. And I think one of the beauties of this Pathfinder is, well, what else can you do with it? If you start being able to play in and around the sat nav, there's many other solutions that can start popping up. Do you create dynamic diversions through a similar method? So you might have, the event coordinator, or it might be more for local authorities in the future. If something's happened, we want to quickly make all the cars go down a specific couple of side streets to then rejoin later on. You have the mechanisms there to do it. So that's quite exciting from a sat nav perspective.
And I think that many of us who've been involved with the London-to-Brighton Run for a number of years now will know a couple of years ago we did have a tragic incident of somebody who did get confused, took the wrong direction, and maybe if they'd had this system, they might have been stopped before. Unfortunately, they were killed in a very unfortunate accident. And that safety of the rally is something that I know is very much at the front of mind of everyone who organises it. So we've got something here that, on the one hand, any number of specific events might use. I'm thinking our country is not the only country that hosts a veteran car run. There are all sorts of historic car events all around the world, certainly around the world, that the FIA keeps an eye on. So should we be promoting what we did in the London-to-Brighton Run to other car clubs, to other members of the FIA who might be organising events? And of course, not necessarily just on road events. I mean, is that something that is worth pursuing, Damien?
Yeah, I think it's quite exciting. Our mantra here is, do we help drivers make better decisions whilst they're driving? And SatNav is a wonderful tool in itself. And you could be on the M25 and you want to drive to York. SatNav can consume and do much more, calculations and pull in more information than a human can with their eyes. So that's a useful tool. And if you build on top of it and you tailor it for these various types of events, it's quite exciting. I guess North Coast 500 is a big trip that everyone takes. It's got a lot of support and solutions around it, but there's a lot of informal events and driving holidays, and people, they're driving around Wales and other parts, and all across the globe, people are doing driving holidays. But would it improve road safety and decisions that people are making on the road if they have this extra information for them? We don't want people stopping in dangerous places, so suggesting where's safe to stop the car, on their trips if there's somewhere scenic to see. We don't want them, looking at tour guide maps. If it can all be provided within a deemed safe environment, I think that's quite a useful, powerful thing to do. And generally for events, larger scale events with lots of cars, having a level of management and knowing where all the vehicles are, learning from mistakes year in, year out, is only going to improve the events going forward.
And I think that something, George, you and I've been talking about was the extent to which it was a good or questionable decision that we made for the London to Brighton run, that instead of having the devices that we provided as part of the research project, a mix of 2 different types of smartphone, put into harnesses on the vehicle, we actually decided in the event that we would create harnesses, prove it could be done, but then what we actually handed out to people taking part in the run was a clipboard with a waterproof cover so that the front seat passenger could have the device. Now, I know the reasons for that, but you and I have been talking about it. I mean, what's your feeling about that? Should we have stuck with the brackets? Should we have just shown we could do this, just like if you were sticking a sucker to the windscreen of your car with a modern holster?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't involved in bolting things on cars. That was, you know, I was well detached from that. But I thought we could have persevered a bit more with the mounting in the car. I don't think we found the right kind of way to mount it in the end. I think if we tried the mount that we did, it wouldn't have lasted very long with the vibration in the car. But as I've said to you, I think there is a mounting system that would do it. I think you have to look to the way things are mounted on motorbikes and so forth to for the right kind of waterproof and vibration tolerant kind of solution there. And that I think that might have been, to me, that would have been better, because it would have been visual, even for the navigator, on the navigator side of the car. I think it would have been better, I think. But just something to think about, I guess. That's the thing.
Well, we're feeling our way here a bit, even though some of this technology is well established, as we know. But someone who was out on a motorbike just earlier today in the wind and the weather, having something attached to their handlebars and making sure that it was safe, secure, and protected from all weathers, including some rather gusty conditions, was something I might have been quite concerned about. But also, you don't want me, when I'm riding my motorbike, taking my hands off the handlebars and trying to interact with it. So again, George, you and I were discussing the way that this approach was configured for the run meant that wasn't going to happen.
No, I did it. I mean, it's worth saying here there were 2 different apps. There was a navigation app, which Damien put together, that we researched with, and there was the app I did, which is an IVS, a pure IVS display, virtual VMS display app. Now, the app that I put together, I set it up so that there was no interaction with the app whatsoever until the vehicle was stationary. So the only intent was that when the vehicle's moving, it's a display. It's fixed. It's turned on. It can't turn off. The app's been engineered so it's not the screen's not gonna die. It's just gonna stay on all the time. And when you stop, a little button comes up that you can press, but it only comes up when you stop. And of course, you can do that because the app knows whether you're moving or not, and it can control what interaction you're allowed at that point. And I thought that was pretty fundamental in that kind of application. You don't want the driver or interacting with it when the vehicle's moving, and that I think is the way. That I think is the way to go with that, anyway.
Well, certainly for some of the vehicles taking part in the London to Brighton run, the driver has quite enough to do. I've sat in the driving seat of some of these cars, and I raise my hat to people who manage to make them function with all of the various knobs and levers and pedals and all of the other contraptions that are involved in making these wonderful old cars still complete the run. But I'm going to come back to you, Damien, on this sort of interactivity. So let's move away from the London to Brighton run for a moment and think more generally about providing information into the cab, into the vehicle, into the driver. Is this SatNav Plus, or is there some other sort of magic to it? Is there something else here that we're expecting it to be more of an interactive thing? I'm going to ask the car what on earth is going on, or is it simply the case that the great big screen in my Tesla is going to show me not only that there's a queue ahead, but the queue ahead is caused by someone who's crashed and I'm going to be stuck still for the next 2 hours?
It's really interesting. I definitely feel there's probably more than one answer to this. From an app perspective, so we're providing an app. The app can integrate into car infotainment systems thanks to Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, but you're still reliant on an app being turned on. You can make different modes in the app, but you're often restricted to providing a sat-nav service for that Apple CarPlay, Android Auto. So as much as you might think there's other ways, you really need to be focused on that if you want to use those mechanisms. So I do think it falls into the sat-nav plus type thing where people are going to be running sat-nav, and you're trying to add these services in. There's a lot of cases where you don't need this. So if it's built into the vehicle, and actually in George's case, with George's app, it's also it's useful in the veteran cars because they don't have speedometers, for example. So having an app which is more like a dashboard has a lot of value because they can see their speed rather than guessing how fast the wind's flowing through your hair. If you're looking at software built in directly into a car, you can have multiple different screens and multiple different touch points with the driver. So there's a wide array of solutions that could be in the future. I guess my question is, how many screens are sensible? Is one screen sensible amount? Is two screens sensible amount? And if you get to too many screens with too much happening on one screen, it probably gets a little bit distracting for the driver. So I guess that work, probably really, start doing it now, but people have been doing it, is, what is the level of appropriate information to provide a driver and the mechanisms to do it? We don't want too much. And obviously Eloy's certainly fitting in with that sat nav and building around the sat nav, because firstly that's where we're sitting, but that's where we see a lot of value. Lots of really good examples around sat nav plus. I guess in the future, as everyone's hunting for a public charging point, it's almost certainly going to be, some sort of voice command, probably help find me charging. And that's going to do some lookup that can be automated that matches your charging requirements. But if you're in a vicinity where you don't know, and those street parking charging points are 1 or 2 streets away, you're probably going to need a sat nav for that piece and some sort of directions to get there. So that probably fits in really nicely with sat nav, but there'll be lots of examples that don't. So yeah, slightly on sat nav plus, but I definitely see space for other things as well.
And so if I stick with you for a second here, Damien, I'm just thinking, and I'm sure there are other products available, but I'm going to say, Alexa, find me a charge point. My car is running out, or indeed my car might itself elect to trigger Alexa and say, I'm going to need a charge point pretty soon, let's find out where they are. And then that's going to be displayed. But to what extent do you at Eloy think about how the data is displayed as opposed to the fact that there is some data that would usefully be conveyed?
Yeah, so displaying information to a driver on a screen is very difficult. So you don't want them, they're driving along, and you don't want them peering down and reading lists. So if you had 6 or 7 available charge points, that might be information about, pricing, brand, etc. That's just, it's going to be really, really difficult. And I think the voice first part is probably quite fundamental. Probably having the driver pre-select a lot of preferences is also important. The Alexa example, I would have thought Alexa and those Alexa-based ones, that Alexa is going to have to somehow launch a sat-nav at some point, whether that's ours or whether that's Google Maps or one of the other ones, which is quite easy to do because the charging point will have an attached destination with like coordinates, and that's enough information to launch any sort of sat-nav product. Is it hard for a driver to be sort of read a list? You've got 6 options and you kind of say, okay, option 3, I would prefer that one. I don't really know if the driver's really going to enjoy that experience. And I think it's going to be fascinating to understand how they do it going forwards.
It does worry me. So I'm going to come back to you on this one, George, as well. This sort of, I'm sitting in my car, I'm trying to pay attention. Obviously, I'm trying to pay attention to the road ahead. I have a personal visceral hatred of touchscreens at work, let alone in the car. So I've got touchscreens proliferating all around the place. I've got heads-up displays. I've got increasingly the modern motor car, the Mercedes S-Class, is looking more like the flight deck of a 747. How are we going to engage with how motorists could actually take on board this information, and how maybe in the future could we bypass the motorist and just make it a conversation between the system and the car, if the car is going to be driving itself?
Well, there's a whole question of what, what's available directly integrated into cars. And I think it increasingly feels rather difficult and a long way off. But as Damien said, there are these two portals, Android Auto and CarPlay, which kind of provide an integration. And I'm working myself with navigation too, as well as a text-based approach. And there are pros and cons to both those sides of things, and there are problems with both and advantages. But they need to be the integration with the car is the best integration with the car, in my view, is one where you basically don't have to do anything. As soon as you're moving, in my view, that's it. You shouldn't be touching anything at that point. And and in a sense that aligns pretty well with providing information to drivers. Telling them there's a roadworks ahead, telling them there's an accident ahead, even talking them into traffic lights, which is something I'm doing. There's a red, it's 10 seconds to red approaching on there. You don't have to touch the screen. Once you're moving, in my view, and in fact, one of the you have Android Auto and CarPlay. They do allow you to touch the screen. They allow you to do far too much, in my view, far too much. But the earlier platform, which is now gone, really, Neuralink, it kind of didn't. What it did was it kind of forced the apps into a different mode when you were moving, and enforced that. And as soon as you were stationary, bang, you could do anything. Yeah. So you're a situation where you're moving, and you just get the information, and you get audio, and you get told what's going on, and then you're stationary, and bang, there's a menu, and you can select your parking and whatever you want to do, but very clearly enforced. Unfortunately, Android Auto and CarPlay don't do that at the moment. I think they allow too much integration, but it's a whole interesting area. And the other side of it as well, that's the screen integration, the direct integration in the car. When you start talking about a phone and a cradle, that's a whole ballpark of potential integration there as well. So, and that tends to get people, the whole issue of phones in cars tends to get people a bit worried, really. And
it gets people very worried. It gets people very overexcited, in my view. And I want to come back to it. And I'm going to come back to the question of not just what's the information that the driver or the vehicle would find useful, but who's generating the information, and a question that Carla Jakeman has flagged here, in what language. But before we do that, we're going to take a brief moment to step back from the conversation we're having about in-car signing, and to pick up on some of the other things that are happening in the TTF world and some of the other events that are happening. Carla is co-founder of the TTF from Innovate UK. Carla's joining us now. Carla, what else can people who are engaging with the TTF be looking forward to in the coming weeks?
Thanks, Steve. Well, there's loads coming up. And thank you all for taking part today. It's been really interesting so far, and I've got loads more questions. There will be recording online, which will be available as soon as possible. So if you want to watch back, or please do share it with some of your colleagues, and also point them to the TTF website, because there's loads more on there as well, more details of stuff that's coming up. We're going to have our next Fireside Chat in 4 weeks. So that's the 16th of March. And also keep in your diaries the 13th of April. That's at 4 p.m. Keep that clear. That's going to be for a chat about the manual for smart streets, if you're interested in that one, which has been created with the Connected Places Catapult. And the big event that you have to attend, you have to keep free in your diary, is the 17th to the 19th of May, a TTF annual conference where you'll get to network and do all the things you've missed for the last 2 years. It will be at the Marriott Hotel in Liverpool, and there's going to be various updates from some of the Transport Technology Forum working groups. There's some very special keynote speakers that we've planned. You're going to get various information and overviews from different solutions that we've been working on, plus plenty of networking, as you'd expect, and details of that will be available next month. Thanks, Steve.
Excellent. Thank you, Carla. So there's plenty coming up there. Do make your way up to Liverpool. I'm reliably assured that a very short walk from the hotel where the event is taking place, you can even go and see a U-boat in a museum. So plenty of good reasons to come to our annual conference, not least, as Carla says, the opportunity to get in touch with people, contacts old and new, and find out what's going on. And so much of what's going on in this area does rely on us understanding what people are up to when they're working on this or that or other aspects of trying to make our transport technology work to get the most out of our road networks, which is so important. So thank you for that, Carla. Now I did, guys, I put you on notice, George, I put you on notice, Damien. I'm going to come back to this question that it's one thing to be running the London-to-Brighton Run. There is a clerk of the course, there's a team working for the clerk of the course. They have a very clear, tightly defined imperative: get the guys driving the veteran cars down to Brighton, parked up on Madeira Drive safely. That's it. Come hell or waters high, that's what they're focused on. Life's more complicated than that. Out on, dare I say it, the M25, out there, out in the road network generally. So if, as a motorist, I'm to benefit from the idea that we could have signing in car, who's going to generate, who's going to be in control? Where's the directing mind for the information that's then going to find its way through to me? Damien, can we come to you first on this? Where do you see this as something for national highways or for local highway authorities, for TomTom or other sat-nav companies to be in charge of? Or does it require some kind of new authority or regulatory arrangement?
I think, I mean, we do a lot of this example where we're driving up a motorway and you see the big VMS, and we've repeated the message inside the vehicle. And it's kind of a really nice test because you can compare a live feed externally with a live feed that comes through a different route into an application and then in the car. But what's important is the messaging where there isn't a VMS. So whether it's, you know, on a different part of the motorway where there isn't one in place, but you want to be near an incident, or you want to provide information maybe more cost effectively. There's the other bit, and it was mentioned, you maybe want to provide it in any number of languages. I guess the beauty of having it digitized, and then the user has an account with Eloy, they've selected their language, is they don't have to have it in English. They can have it in any language that they've preferred, and then the text-to-speech software puts it in their own language. The difficult bit there is you need to make sure that you're translating a message that's generated presumably in English, because it's from national highways, into the required languages for everyone else, and that requires a lot of future work. But is the driver going to find that more effective or more useful? And I think so. My feel is it's transport management, transport authorities, whether that's local authorities all the way up to national highways, that are generating these messages, that are finding it way across, is the most suitable way to do it. If it's left, presumably in the private sector, two gut feelings come to mind. One, you just end up with a lot of spurious, incoherent, uncoordinated information. And as a driver, you don't want to get an in-vehicle message every 50 meters, because you'll turn it off anyway, but it'll be very, very annoying. but also it's got to be managed to help coordinate the roads and make them run effectively. So from my point, there needs to be some sort of coordinated centralized function to build these and display these and send them out into the wide world.
And so, George, I'm thinking here of the challenge I set some years ago now to my colleagues in the transport department, which is, here I am, I'm driving along, glorious day, suddenly I find myself approaching the tail end of a queue on a motorway, and I've got no idea what's going on up ahead of me. I've just gone past the last exit, I'm now stuck. The government, for its own reasons, has said I can't even pick my phone up and call home to say I'm going to be late. I'm just sitting there and I don't know what's going on up ahead. Is that something where we're dependent on the Traffic Control Centre, the National Highways Traffic Control Centre, taking the initiative and being able to send what would otherwise be a variable message sign message, but the VMS is behind me, that they could send that to me because they know they could send a message that was bespoke to a certain junction-to-junction cohort of traffic?
Yeah, well, that's what you've just described is the essence of a lot of the work that I've been doing over the last few years, and the system that we used for the London-to-Brighton was actually just was just me reusing and making a special version for the London-to-Brighton of a system that I've been building to do exactly that, with the objective of being able to ingest all the information that's there from traffic authorities, i.e. from National Highways, from Traffic Scotland, from all the local authorities, Transport for London and so forth, all the information that they publish on message signs, and also to, over the top of that, add on virtual VMSs. So add on virtual signs to complete the picture, to close the gaps, to be able to address the situation that you just described, where, well, there isn't a VMS, but you've got this queue, and wouldn't it be great to tell the driver something about what's going on at that point? So in essence, the systems I've put together, as indeed was done for the London-to-Brighton, the idea would be the Traffic Control Centre, as well as their real VMS, would be able to click on the road at the point where this hazard is and immediately enter the information to the driver, or integrate it with their some of these systems have quite sophisticated setups for transforming incidents automatically into virtual VMS, into signs, into VMS signs. So you're not actually entering anything at all. You're just saying there's an accident here, and immediately the system works out where all the VMSs should be, sets them, and fires them off. And some of those VMSs could be real, and some of them could be virtual at the exact point in space that they're needed. So the cars that are approaching at that point immediately get the message, as well as the physical VMS. And the systems I've put together do that in an experimental sort of way, actually across the whole UK. At different levels, and add in traffic lights and stuff like that as well. So that's kind of a vision, a kind of national system where you can, wherever you are in the country, you get the information, and you have the potential of the local authority and the national authority adding virtual VMS as well instantly into the mix. The thing. I think
okay, so hold that thought for a second. And I was just going to say that there has been a question come in about how people, particularly with veteran or perhaps just classic cars, such as a Mark 1 Audi TT, feel about having it festooned with modern tech. And I'm just going to see whether Andy Graham feels like coming into the panel here to say a bit about how the owners of the veteran cars at the London-to-Brighton Run felt about having brackets devised and how he got on with Michael in the motor house. But while Andy's thinking about the answer to that, Damien, we've got all sorts of information out there. We've got a local traffic manager who might be thinking, here's what I want to happen. And we've got a sat-nav company whose job is to get me past the jam. And let's be honest about this, I am obviously extremely concerned about every other road user, so long as I get to where I want to go when I want to get there. And if somebody else can help them, well, that's nice to have. But the reason I've invested, the reason I've spent my money, subscribed to a sat-nav service is to beat the queues. How do we deal with these potentially competing pressures?
It's a very tough one, and then there's actually another competing pressure with it as well. But if you describe an example, there's this element of individual effort. You put your effort in, and then you get your individual gain, which is getting to your destination faster. But sat-navs generally optimize on an individual level, so they get your start point and end point. They can pull in other traffic information, but it's looking to optimize you yourself. One of the things that sat-navs can do, as everyone uses it, is cause this problem of unintended consequences. So there's been an incident on a main road, and everyone's going off down the country lanes and they get clogged up, for example. And ideally, the best solution is some sort of optimal solution that reduces the average time every car spends on the road. Unfortunately, what that might mean is some cars take longer than others. So you get this problem of compliance, do people follow it, but also you just also have a participation problem, because a big chunk of people aren't going to have the thing turned on in the first place. And it's one of these difficult challenges that everyone used sat-nav and followed it. Probably what autonomous cars will do in the future. We probably find really nice new ways to manage the roads, but we're going to have this problem in the interim that human behaviour is certainly going to get in the way. Does rewarding people help? Do you get sort of some discount on some sort of road pricing in the future for good behaviour? That might be one little carrot to dangle, but it's going to be very, very hard to manage. And if you're relying on sort of applications to manage that and allocate it, I think that's going to be very, very difficult. It's a difficult challenge. There's some things you can do. So I'm apart from being fascinated with sat-nav, I'm fascinated with parking attached to sat-nav. And there's this beautiful solution for aircraft boarding. People want to get on an airplane, and everyone tries to go in the first row, then the second row, then the third row. And then airlines decide, actually, let's put everyone in the back row, then the second's the back row, and the third back row. Collectively, they're the worst two ways to get people to board the plane. If you have a structured approach where you do row 30, row 25, row 20, you can get everyone to get on the plane 80% quicker. So again, that's the same sort of problem. How do you enforce it? But you could, if it's attached to parking, and a lot of things are attached to parking because your trip ends in parking, you do discounted parking. So there's a nice way that maybe you can dangle the carrot that way as well. But it's a very, very difficult challenge. How do people stay compliant, and how do people participate in the first place?
That's a tricky one, and I think it's something that we, if I may put it this way, within the TTF community, we're endlessly playing with the potential of new systems and the potential of using data. But maybe something we need to think a bit more about is how that potential gets realized. What has to be true? My favorite question, in terms of who makes the decisions, who's in control here, who's got the controlling mind. And that's something we need to come to. And I've long mused on how I feel about my car saying the equivalent of, "I'm sorry, Dave, I can't let you do that." I don't even like the sat-nav telling me when to turn left, because I tend to argue. But let's put that to one side. Let's come back to a just very basic practical issue. Andy, there you are. You're in the motor house at the Royal Automobile Club Epsom. There are these beautiful cars from the very early 1900s. People don't want you to touch them, let alone drill holes in them. So how do we get people to think, I quite like the idea of having a new sort of bracket or a new thing, or even something else on the dashboard of my Audi TT.
Okay, well, thanks, Steve. I mean, the answer is one size doesn't fit all. So as you said, we started out using some brackets, and if you look at the report that's online, this wonderful report, there's some lovely pictures of how we actually fitted them to Daimlers and things. The answer is you've got to be sympathetic to the vehicle. So it's made of brass and walnut and leather. So we had things that were made out of sort of brass and walnut and leather. But we also used some high-tech stuff that's kind of that clamps the cameras to top gear vehicles when they're being driven around 150 miles an hour. What we decided in the end was actually, because we thought it might rain, that a waterproof clipboard was good, because everyone had a clipboard anyway to hold their answers in. When we started worrying about aesthetics, we found that many of the cars had got GoPros fitted, they'd got cameras fitted anyway, or when they were worried about it, they were kind of hidden away underneath the sort of dashboard, even though they don't have a windscreen. So I think, you know, 500 odd cars going to be on the London-to-Brighton Run this year, and some of them, some of them are penny farthing motorbikes. Sorry, bikes. Some of them are steam powered. Some of them are three-wheel motorbikes, all that kind of thing. We're going to have a whole range of different things. We also used earbuds to get the speech into people's ears rather than to look at the screen, when you could hide the thing in your pocket. So the answer is a whole host of answers. I hear what Carla says. I've got a relatively old Audi as well. I don't like sticking my sat nav on the screen, but then when I get lost and when it warns me about queues, it's quite important. And just to add a couple of things to what we did on London to Brighton, in order to get news about roadworks, we had a feed from our network, which we incorporated in some of the messaging. And we also had a feed of congestion from them, which I think is TomTom data and here data. And we also had a feed from INRIX, who provided what was called unexpected queues, which is exactly as George described, is there's an incident ahead, I'm going to automatically generate you a message. And the other thing is, coming soon, George is working along with Damien on some very interesting roadworks detection stuff, which is in our secret skunk works, but will be revealed fairly soon, hopefully in time for Liverpool, where we can detect the roadworks are wrong without actually having to be on site and being touched by a human hand. So all this thing about the road operator needing to, you know, set up VMS and things like that, I think that's for a certain number of instances, but we can certainly automate quite a lot. And we're looking forward to doing the London to Brighton Run, hopefully, touch wood, in November next year with a lot more vehicles. But Damien and I in particular are working on some other motoring events to test all the tech, coming to a veteran classic or modern car club near to you this summer. So watch this space.
Thank you, Andy. Well, look, I'm going to come straight back up to you, George. Andy has referred to the skunk works. We're not going to ask you to lift the veil on things that are going to be properly discussed at our event in Liverpool, the TTF annual conference in person. Get it in your calendars now. But I'm going to ask about that that real-time aspect of this. That it's one thing to have a notification through the DFT system that some utility said it was going to dig the road up then, and it said it was going to have the road clear by then. But what we all know is quite often it didn't actually dig the road up then, and it hasn't taken the temporary traffic lights off by then. So short of actually having somebody going out there with a smartphone checking, how do we automate that sort of real-time information, which is annoying for us as ordinary motorists, but it's actually a real business problem for the world of logistics and deliveries?
Yeah, well, the line of attack there that is developing is that there are companies that are basically developing what's called a digital twin of active roadworks, where the signage, the physical signage itself, has with it communications equipment. I think road operators find this useful to be able to see basically and get a live view, a live digital view of what's deployed and when it's deployed. You know, it really is deployed. It's really there. You know, rather, and that's a kind of developing area that's moving forward. And if you've got a digital twin of physical roadwork schemes, then that can be translated into signage, into virtual signage. And these can be automatic virtual VMS that appear when at the same point that the roadworks are put out, disappear when the roadworks are removed. And as the car approaches, you get the message in the vehicle, as well as being on the physical sign. So that is the way. But it is a key point, because just publishing that there's roadworks isn't the same as there actually is roadworks.
No,
and if I can add on the London to Brighton, we had drawings in incredible detail of all the fixed signs that were going to be put up before the London to Brighton. And then we found that when we drove down the route, they weren't quite as expected. So George and I had to fix some virtual signs on the fly, which is good because that's the whole system designed to do. But equally, things like coning off of lanes for veteran vehicles. Again, we were relying on paper drawings that were produced a few weeks ago. We didn't get the first car down with a camera on board, which is a lesson for the future that we should do that to verify. But as George says, if you've got the digital twin of signs that are put out, cones that are put out, automatically into the vehicle, untouched by human hand, no need to go out and verify. And that's something that we'd be really excited about.
So what I'm going to take us to in the closing minutes of this particular TTF Fireside Chat, let's remind everyone that at the end of this chat, we're going to be giving you a short questionnaire. We'd like some feedback. We'd like some ideas for future events. But a lot of what we've talked about has been, if you like, communication between the network operator and the driver, or communication that tells people about the condition of the network to the driver or to the automated vehicle. But I want to touch on vehicle to vehicle. So one of the questions that's come in envisages a world where, let's say, George's car detects that there's a very low temperature, icy road surface, and he needs to be a bit more gentle with the throttle than normally when he's, I think the term is clogging it along the road. But maybe the fact that George's car's detected that could alert Damien's car, following about half a mile behind, and even trigger a different throttle setting. I mean, even my very basic motorbike has different settings for rain and for general use. Could we see that sort of automation coming through, that the vehicle is going to detect something and a system will exist so that vehicles following on that same route get that information and perhaps automatically adjust the driving accordingly?
If I can have a quick answer, the answer is yes, it's already been looked at by modern vehicles. So the Volkswagen ID3 that I've ordered that may arrive in a year will have the ability to talk to other Volkswagen ID3s in what we call vehicle to vehicle. I think there's a lot more that could be done about existing vehicles and providing data from OEMs, and they're starting to provide data in a number of different projects. National Highways is involved in one of those. I think a really exciting idea might be to use that temperature data and feed it into the gritting model that the winter maintenance people use, because I think it was some work that the RAC Foundation showed that something like 25% of grit and sand that goes and salt that goes on the road isn't actually needed. So if you had more accurate temperature data points to feed into the model, all right, you have to correct for the fact that they're from outside of the vehicle rather than in the road and all that, but big data. Could we save a whole load of salt that gets put down that then gets washed into steel structures and washed into watercourses? So I'd like to see that bigger picture as well, of not just warning other vehicles, but that slip road at Reigate is getting really cold. We ought to go and grit that now rather than wait until it's got cold in an hour's time and then HGVs slip up and down it, for example, in a local thing.
Well, so in that happy world, George has gone through, his car's detected that the slip road is slippery. The local depot has been alerted, that's where they need to go. But in the meantime, Damien and I are trundling up the road behind George. We're in our cars. Damien, can you see a world where our cars are informed by the data generated by the cars ahead and maybe even automatically act upon it?
Yes, there's a lot of exciting different combinations you can have here, whether it's vehicle to vehicle, vehicle to grid back to vehicle. You might have the driver generating it also rather than the pure vehicle. So one of the things we built really early on when we built Eloy was this report incident function where you could go and say, hey Siri, report incident, and then Eloy would be able to listen to an audio message and generate it. But you can actually start thinking about there's more stuff you can do with that. You could create a distress signal that could be, I think it's Etsy denim type message, and that's then stored and sent and used in various ways. Whether the driver initiates it or whether the vehicle initiates it is quite fascinating. Newer cars have loads more sensors than the old cars. So we could have you could be driving around in your 1990s banger, but you've got your mobile phone mounted. That mobile phone can have the vehicle to vehicle technology in it. And a brand spanking new Volkswagen can do all the sensing work and pick up more information from the road, but can broadcast it to less sophisticated cars. And I think that's quite fascinating, where these newer cars can actually provide almost a community service to older vehicles. I think it's quite amazing. So really, it's probably going to be done on a cellular communication level. And I do think it's quite exciting, and I think a lot of work is being done by various companies, and I think probably later this year, I think things might start to emerge with some nice solutions.
Somewhere between exciting and dystopic is where I think we are on the scale of things, and I often find myself reflecting that in the seminal film I, Robot, he couldn't have ridden a motorbike like that if the motorbike had gone, actually, it's a bit slippery out there, let's slow down. But that's another point. I'm going to pick up here a couple of things that have come into the chat. So first up, there's been a question about the development of the digital twin and whether that's stalled or whether that's going ahead, or who's doing what going ahead. Certainly, we've been involved in digital twin work in collaboration with National Highways and others as part of our work at the Foundation on exploring road collision investigation. But I also have a response here from Carla Jakeman that if Keely, who posed the question, would like to get in touch with Carla, there's more information to be had. Carla hasn't got it to share this afternoon, but is very happy to put you in touch with the people who have got that. And then there's a reference to the work done on, I think it's pronounced CITE, C-I-T-E, project in Coventry. I can see George nodding there. I mean, is that something that we should be pointing people towards? Is that something that's written up that we can say there are some links to be pursued there if people are interested, George?
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting from my point of view. I've had some discussions around that work, but I was never able to see a detailed report on it, which would have been quite interesting.
Look, I'm just going to have to work on the hope that one of the people who are attending this heard that, and perhaps that's something for DFT colleagues to pursue. Perhaps Darren, if he's on the call, or Carla as another of the government representatives here, that when we're getting on and funding projects like that, it is so important that the work is documented and made available. Otherwise, we're never going to know and we're never going to learn. So indeed, and indeed, even hard copy reports, as Mr. Graham is pointing to here, made from almost certainly the pulped wood of the trees that used to be in his back garden. There is a place for all of these things. Now we're heading into the last minute of this particular TTF Fireside Chat. I'd just like to thank all the people on the panel who've taken part in this. I'd like to thank Paul Hutton for the video and for creating the video that you can all click on and have a look in the link. I'm reliably assured that as I say a fond farewell, that the screen will change and there'll be an opportunity for attendees to give a bit of feedback on the chat and to give some suggestions for future events. So as the clock on my laptop ticks over to 5 o'clock, I'm going to wish everyone a safe trip home. If you're not at home already, have a nice weekend, stay safe, Thank you to the panel, and that's all for today's Transport Technology Forum Fireside Chat. Please join us again for future ones. Please do come to our conference in Liverpool later this year. Cheerio.